Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's my pleasure to be here today. Thank you all for coming. I've known Ugur for a number of years, but I'm going to be a little bit formal with you today, but brief. Ugur Ungor was awarded a PhD cum laude by the University of Amsterdam in 2009. In the year 2008-09, he was lecturer in international history at the Department of the University of Sheffield, and in 2009-10 academic year, he was postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for War Studies of University College, Dublin. Currently, he is associate professor in the Department of History at Utrecht University. Dr. Ungor has published 3 books and some 19 articles. His subjects range from the Armenian Genocide to the Rwandan Genocide to theories of mass violence to the making of modern Turkey, his most recent and award-winning book published by Oxford University Press. He has contributed significantly to our understanding of the Armenian Genocide, Ottoman history, and the field of genocide studies. Since the Armenian Genocide is still a highly controversial subject in Turkey, and one of the most important obstacles to the formation of normal relations between Armenia and Turkey, it is fitting that today Dr. Ungor speak about the Armenian Genocide and modern Turkey, problems and possible solutions. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Ugur Ungor.
Thank you very much for inviting me on this very bright and sunny day. Thank you for being with us today. I'd like to begin my talk today by underlining that everything that I will be saying today in this presentation is based on 3 books as well as some 150 to 200 interviews. And I'll explain in the course of this talk what the conclusions are that I draw from my research, and also how we can move on and how we can move forward in the study of the Armenian Genocide. I think it's very fitting that I came back to Toronto almost slightly more than 10 years after I first began studying the genocide. In 2003 summer, it was a very hot summer, and I came to the Summer Institute of the Zoryan Institute, the Genocide Summer Course, and I met many Armenian students of my age, and had many warm discussions with them about the Armenian Genocide. And the question they would always ask me, every single one, sometimes even twice, was how could you, as a nominal Turk, be interested, but not only interested, but also actively committed to studying the genocide? The answer to that question I will give in about 25 minutes when I discuss some of the interviews that I've done. I'd like to begin by pointing out that my talk today is in 3 parts. I will discuss first the broad outlines of the Armenian Genocide. That's the first part of my talk. Then I'll move on to how the Turkish state historically has dealt with this genocide and why. And third, I will try to explore some of the popular memory, so society, hence the title of my talk, The Armenian Genocide and Modern Turkey Between State and Society. Now, on the eve of the First World War, approximately more than 2 million Armenians lived in the Ottoman Empire. This was a sizable community. They owned about 2,500 churches, 450 monasteries, and some 2,000 schools. In the spring of 1915, the Young Turk government took several decisions that would change and affect the Ottoman community in a profound and irreversible way. Because by the end of the war, due to a series of measures, which I have enumerated here, the approximately 3,000 Armenian settlements, villages, towns, neighborhoods in cities were depopulated, and the majority of the inhabitants were dead. Today, virtually no Armenians live in the Anatolian, kind of historic Armenian provinces any longer. Outside of Istanbul, Armenians nowadays possess 7 churches, no monasteries, and no schools. Now, these very simple observations sketch the contours of a very complex history. Now, much like other genocides, and maybe the Armenian genocide resembles every other genocide that we have studied so far, it can be considered a complex process of several overlapping and sequential processes and developments that together produced a process of systematic destruction. And I've tried to lay out these processes as follows: persecution, decapitation, expropriation, deportation, genocide, mass murder, forced assimilation, famine, crime, and destruction and denial. So when students come up to me, and my students ask me, "Professor, I'd like to study the Armenian deportation," or they say, "Professor, I'm interested in studying the Armenian massacre of 1915," I say it's wrong. It's not just massacre or just deportation. It's a range of different policies that all may be different and have different form and target different groups, but together as a whole produce this intended and systematic destruction. So it's too simple and it's wrong to reduce the genocide to the Armenian deportation or the Armenian massacre, because it was much more than that. And I'll begin, if I may, with the first very important process of decapitation. Of course, we all know that on the 24th of April 1915, arrests and mass executions began of Armenian economic, religious, political, and intellectual elites. These killings, they began in Istanbul and they were replicated in other provinces. And I want to say 2 things about them. First of all, they were very systematic. In Bitlis, for example, or in Harpert, all leading Armenian men were arrested virtually in one day, immediately led out of the city and killed, sometimes by shooting and sometimes by blunt instruments, hacking. Very systematic. There's very good evidence that the Turkish police, the gendarmerie, was working with lists of men that they set up from before. Secondly, this mass assassination was very fast. It was very speedy. And sometimes I think about the genocide, I am still surprised about the speed of this process. And we need to understand, why was it so fast? Because within a matter of weeks, the entire intelligentsia of a thriving community was exterminated. So it was very systematic, very fast. And one more important thing. Here are 2 victims of the mass executions of Armenian elites. On the left, we have Krikor Zohrab, who one could argue was a liberal, secular writer and a lawyer, politician. There were rumors that he was an atheist. And on the right, we see the Bishop of Malatya, Mikhail Khachadurian. Both of these men were killed in 1915, and of course the bishop is a conservative cleric. Neither of these men were members of any political party, but they were assassinated together. Now, what do these 2 men have in common? One is a liberal, secular intellectual, the other one is a conservative cleric. At the time, very few Armenian elites understood why they were being targeted together. They did not see the logic of the genocide, because the only thing they have in common is the fact that they are Armenians. And this is the only category that the genocide targeted, the ethnic identity of the victims. Secondly, we have a process of expropriation that I believe, after conducting research for it for a few years, 3-4 years, I published a book titled Confiscation and Destruction. The expropriation of the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, to me, is an example of one of the largest cases of capital transfer in modern history. When you think about the scale of this process, you get dizzy. And I'll give a few statistics. Now, parallel to the deportation, the Young Turk government issued 3 decrees, only 3 laws. That's it. One dealing with the property, one dealing with the immovable property, one with the movable properties, and then the property of the church. That one was the last one. And these decrees stipulated that Armenians would be dispossessed of everything. And special committees were set up, the committees for abandoned property. Now think about that word, abandoned property, were set up to deal and to manage this theft. Now this was a frontal attack on the Armenian economy of the empire. The Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of the Interior, and the Ministry of Finance, of course, were tasked in the daily management. Now you can imagine people are dispossessed, the government takes everything away from them. So cash, jewelry, livestock, land, houses, summer houses, farms, businesses, workshops, factories, everything up to and including the clothes, the very clothes people were wearing, was taken from them. And here we see a textile factory, an Armenian textile factory, which was one of the most modern textile factories in the Ottoman Empire. All of the employees were deported, most of the men were killed, and the factory was taken over by a new Turkish owner. Now, these statistics are really interesting. According to Talat Pasha's own notebook, 41,117 buildings were confiscated. How do we know this? Because Talat Pasha took notes very meticulously, based on reports coming to him from the empire, from the provinces. He kept track very precisely of these confiscations of this property, and he had a little notebook, the Black Book. After he passed away, he was assassinated, his wife, Hayriye Hanım, held on to this notebook until in the late 1980s, I think, a Turkish journalist named Murat Bardakçı managed, after many discussions and attempts to convince this woman to please give this notebook to us, it's important for history. The woman handed it over to this journalist. Now, Murat Bardakçı was kind enough to publish this in Turkish, and it was translated by Ara Sarafyan into English. You can read it online. What we see here is a bookkeeping, an accountancy of an enormous process of plunder. The commissions liquidated all the property and assigned it to Turks. So 41,000 buildings is an enormous amount of property. We can't even begin to understand how much cash or how much immovable property was confiscated. What also would happen is, let's say you would be a shop owner. Let's say you own a spice shop. You sell spices in the bazaar, in the market. And the spice shop is doing well. It sells for 3,000 Turkish lira on the market. What happened in the genocide is that the government would come up to your shop, kick you out, take the shop, and then sell it for maybe 30 lira to a new Turkish owner. And in this book, in this booklet by Talat Pasha, most of these processes are laid out statistically. Now, of course, the Armenian Genocide is most known for deportation. And we know that on the 23rd of May, 24 April is the date everybody knows. But 23 May also is an extremely important date, because in all the research I did in the archives, this was the day in which I found one document, one telegram to all provinces ordering the deportation of the complete Armenian millet, so the community, to the Syrian province of Deir ez-Zor. The daily management of this deportation was delegated to the Interior Ministry. Talat Pasha was the Interior Minister, and he coordinated the process from A to Z, from beginning to end. Now we see a huge mobilization, of course, a huge peasant population is mobilized, sometimes within hours, sometimes within days. to march in the middle of the summer distances of more than 1,000 kilometers, making death very probable. And we also know that the Turkish government sent the Armenians to Deir ez-Zor because they knew that survival was extremely difficult there. They knew that Deir ez-Zor was a wasteland because before they tried to settle Circassians there or Chechens there, and most of these people suffered diseases, hunger, and famine. Now, after these 4 processes, we're still not done. The genocide is only gaining momentum. Mass murder is, of course, the central characteristic of all genocides. And we see in the summer of 1915 an escalating process of mass murder of Armenian civilians by the special organization. Some provinces didn't see any deportations at all, but only mass murder carried out by the special organization, the Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa in Turkish. Now, there are virtually no photographs of these units. This is the only one I found in the Turkish archives in which the men, and they're all men, some of them are young in their 20s, others are older in their 40s, there's a few men in their 50s. They're standing in front of the war ministry. I think it's an important detail. When I first saw this photo, I looked at the men and what kind of clothes they're wearing, what kind of weapons they're holding, how they relate to each other. But then I forgot to look at the building behind it. This is the Ministry of War. So when we hear forms of denial that yes, there were some killings of Armenians, but the government has nothing to do with these units. They were operating on their own volition, on their own initiative. Now, what are they doing then in front of the war ministry in a very clear formation? And why does the text under it say that they are being trained by the Ministry of Interior and sent out to various parts of the empire? So this proves the involvement of the state in the mass killings. We have a very clear link with a picture like this, if even this was in doubt. So that's the 5th process of the genocide, but we're still not done. We see a process of forced assimilation, of absorption of women and children, especially into Turkish households. This was based on the forced disavowal of group identity, to put it in a complex term. So Armenians could renounce Christianity and convert to Islam. Some of them could get away with it, especially women and smaller children.